Watch this.
By the time it was ready to sunset, they still hadn't produced a work product, and people forget that.
Just 6 months after disbanding Idaho's only maternal review committee, those responsible for getting rid of it are leading the charge to bring it back. But they say it's going to be better this time. What we thought was a loose interpretation of committee protocol was actually just how the chairman does it. Representative Brent Crane responds to how he handled his House State Affairs hearing. Moments in history set in stone and shared with current Gem State lawmakers. Idaho's House of Representatives got a gift from the Idaho State Historical Society. But maybe you'd like to know the whole story.
We won't have the ability to look at cases from sort of a multidisciplinary way anymore, and what you end up with kind of with some raw numbers.
As you saw there, that interview was from back in July, which marks the turning over of the fiscal calendar. But that new year didn't get a complete re-rack of new funding. It closed the book on Idaho's Fetal Mortality Review Committee. And with that, Idaho became the only state in the country to not have a state-endorsed board to review pregnancy-related deaths. Republicans found the committee to lack value because it didn't give lawmakers a, quote, work product, though we know it did produce annual reports. And in a state with restrictive health care for pregnant women, a la abortion laws, Democrats have been calling for the committee's return since day one. But the person pushing to bring that committee back might not be the one anyone is expecting. It's the same person who killed it, according to the Democrats and Andrew Bartline.
The road's rolling into the State House. Ideally halt at the call to fix what's broken.
Next item on the agenda.
Or in this case,
Representative Blanksma.
What's been lost.
This is with regard to the Board of Medicine.
And on the heels of a committee left unfunded, disbanded.
It's pretty straightforward.
Representative Megan Blanksma sponsors its revival.
So that there is some sort of ability to review it and make policy based upon what we know.
In July of 2023, the new fiscal calendar folded on the state's Maternal Mortality Review Committee. The group was tasked to investigate pregnancy-related deaths. But after 4 years, Republican leadership decided it delivered on fewer favors than promised.
While they were reviewing data, there was nothing for the legislature to review.
Blanksma says her bill patches that disconnect because the data is still gathered by Health and Welfare.
And people forget that.
This bill brings back the committee, but now under the oversight of the State Board of Medicine.
Streamline the process and then provide the findings for the state legislature.
It's a welcomed pitch on the other side of the aisle.
Yeah.
Especially to Alana Rebel.
If we're getting to the bottom of why women are dying and they're preventable deaths and we can address that, it's a good thing.
But Rebel's still quick to point out this is a problem the legislature created for itself in the first place.
I suspect she got a lot of political heat for her role in ending that committee last year. So I'm delighted that she is joining us in supporting the restoration of the Maternal Mortality Review Committee this year.
The legislature created the original Maternal Mortality Review Committee through 2019 legislation. It produced 4 reports in total and reviewed pregnancy-related deaths from 2018 to 2021. It found 41 of 43 deaths were preventable, which sounds like valuable information.
If you look at the dates on the reports, they didn't come out until after the committee sunset.
Well, sorta. The committee completed the final report just 1 month before disbanding, though it analyzed data that was already 2 years old.
We heard a GOP lawmaker tell us.
Dr. Stacy Seibs sat on that committee and answered this concern last summer.
We were establishing a baseline to try and figure out where we were at and where we were going. It's not the type of work that is reactive, okay? It's trying to put together the trends, find out what are the biggest problems, investigating to see what needs to be done.
That baseline the committee says it established now lacks a multidisciplinary review over the last 2 years of raw data.
I wish she hadn't killed it last year, but we are where we are.
Signify by saying aye.
But here,
Aye.
Blanksma's betting it's different this time around. More oversight, more accountability.
We shouldn't be creating committees to create committees. That's not the point. The point is to get the data review so that we can make good policy based upon the data that we're getting.
This was an introduction hearing today, so time will tell if this is a bill that gets legs under it and makes its way through the legislature. Blinksma was consistent with her message on why that group disbanded from when she talked about it 6-7 months ago. She says she wants a report to be given to lawmakers with direct information to direct policy. She says the language of this bill will ensure that. As for Rebel, she says until she hears testimony on it, it's tough to fully know how she feels about the finer details of that bill, but is happy at the very least, Brian, that it is being revisited, and then it seems that leaders in the majority party want to have a conversation about potentially bringing it back.
It seemed like the timeline of getting this information was kind of the issue back last session when this thing disbanded. Is that addressed in this bill at all?
I haven't seen the finer language of it. It takes a while for those RSs to be posted once they officially become bills. But I do know the first year they did was 2018 with the data, the original committee, and it was created in 2019, and then the fiscal year would have been halfway through that year. So they had to do a little bit of retroactive work. By the time they finished up, they were still about 1.5 years behind what was currently happening.
Yeah. It is interesting the way it went out and now the way it's coming back is kind of full circle, I guess. If you will.
Maybe the same players are on the new board. We'll see how it shakes out.
All right, thanks, Andrew. We'll keep an eye on that one. Well, the latest library bill, which we've been following, House Bill 384, passed through the House State Affairs Committee with flying colors yesterday. It was the 11-2, that was the vote. Overwhelming, albeit party line support, despite the overwhelming opposition to the bill, those who were heard and those who signed up to testify. During our coverage of the Children's School and Library Protection Act moving to the full House, we drew attention to how that committee meeting was controlled by the chair. That'd be Representative Brent Crane from Nampa. It seemed to loosely follow Mason's Manual of Legislative Procedure, which are the House rules at the Idaho Capitol. But as we pointed out yesterday, loosely followed is one way to put it. Unabashed indifference, well, that might be another. But how would Representative Crane put it? While he was unavailable yesterday, he did take some time to tell us today.
But just to outline for everybody watching today, every chairman is given the flexibility to run their meeting the way that they feel appropriate. So your job is to run the meeting. Committee will have consideration, House Bill 384, Representative Crane. But one of the difficult things as being the chairman is you're trying to run the meeting, but you also have questions as well. But I do have a question for you. You can ask questions if you want to ask questions. You've got to be limited, and that's why I said that. So I'll ask one more question. The chair's not supposed to ask many questions, but I'll ask because this is of interest to me.
However, in Monday's meeting,
what would you have liked Representative Crane to include in the bill?
Chairman Crane asked,
do you think it's a good idea that we put some of those provisions in place?
Quite a few questions.
Can you show me where the censoring is at? Can you point to me the section in the bill that's requiring you to post a guard in there and lock your elevator, et cetera,
but also pointed out when others shouldn't.
I'm going to let that question stand, but I think you are asking a question you know the answer to.
Well, yes. I do.
Yeah, that's called leading the witness.
Despite seeming to do that same thing earlier in the hearing.
Just to drill further, so you're telling me that if I find a book offensive and I fill out this form, that they are not removing the book, they're just simply relocating the book somewhere in the library?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Representative Crane's explanation?
I had not read his bill.
You hadn't?
No, I had not read his bill at all. So I wanted to know exactly what does your bill do? The narrative that's been out there is this is banning books, this is burning books. So I wanted to get it on the record in front of the committee. Is this banning books? Is this just moving books?
You hadn't looked at this bill at all?
No, I had not read the bill at all.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I don't read a lot of them. That I let them come and make their case to me as chairman as well. Some chairmen like to read through the bill prior to having a hearing. I'm more conceptual. So I'll have them come into my office, tell me about the concept. What are you trying to do? Then that way I can approach it just like any other member and see it fresh. Here's what they're trying to do. Okay, great. And then I can make my determination.
Questions are one thing. Running a meeting while remaining neutral is another. According to the Mason's Manual, like you're supposed to, as a chair, remain unbiased, kind of give equal opportunity to both sides. At one point,
I haven't heard a library yet that doesn't have a policy. It sounds like they all have a policy. It's not working. These books still are coming up.
Might be a good fit for a different 15-year-old.
I'm sorry, Paige, these are not appropriate for any 15-year-old kid. Yep.
Does that sound unbiased?
No, it's probably coming from a source of frustration. This is the third year that this bill has come before my committee. I'd like to get the issue resolved. Parents are continuing to complain to us and saying, hey, look, there's a problem. These books are appearing in our libraries. And the content that we've seen over the last 3 years, that stuff doesn't have any business in being in the hands of a minor.
Should that be in the hands of the legislature, or should that be a local decision based on the library and their boards?
The problem is the legislature's having to step in because the libraries are failing to have policies that are addressing these particular issues.
So Crane's self-review of his handling of his House State Affairs Committee.
Not a single member of this body or of my committee has said anything about it.
We did ask Representative Crane about the number of people who did sign up to testify during yesterday's hearing. 400 who were opposed to the bill versus only about 70 who were in favor of it. Meanwhile, the testimony entered the record. Well, that didn't quite match that ratio if you were listening. Representative Crane chalked it up to the hearing falling on a holiday, Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And it was also Idaho Education Association Day at the State House. So he says all those people who normally wouldn't be at the Capitol, well, they were. The Children's School and Library Protection Act advanced, and it now waits a debate on the House floor.
Members of the Joint Finance and Appropriation Committee are going to have to do their homework in advance of the committee this year. We think that's a good thing.
I think that getting those budgets started on the front end will help people see them, understand them better, and get us out of here earlier too. A lot of times we get at the end of the session and stuff's getting passed and thrown at us on those budgets that we don't understand.
Okay, so last week we talked about the new streamlined process the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee will put into play this session. The plan, they tell us, in its simplest form, is for agencies to submit their PowerPoints of the requested budgets, like they always do. But instead of presenting that PowerPoint in front of the whole committee, members are going to take those PowerPoints home and treat it like homework. And then those agencies will stand for questions in front of like subcommittees, smaller groups. And the hope was to cut down the number of 3-hour JFAC meetings that have always seemed to be the norm every session at the State House. However, there seemed to be another part of this streamlined process that missed a lot of the people that were not on the inside of it. According to Ilana Rebel, the House Democratic Minority Leader, who says she and many others only learned about it Friday. Apparently, JFAC passed a whole bucket full of skeleton budgets today, the kind that would be just enough to keep the lights on, not funding the launch program, for example, or teacher pay raises or repairs to roads, really bare bones stuff in order to save time. The idea is apparently to pass these budgets, since that's the #1 priority of the state legislature. If they only did that one thing, they could go home having fulfilled their constitutional requirement. So I guess the plan is to then reopen these budgets at a later date and adjust them according to, well, what is requested, like funding the governor's launch program. But as they say, and according to Rebel, the devil is in the details.
Well, the catch is that my understanding from talking to the parliamentarian is that the threshold to reopen a budget, which is what you're going to have to do after 110 budgets are passed this morning, the threshold vote for that requires a 2/3 vote.
Thank you. A quorum being present, we are ready for business.
So what they've really effectively done is they've increased the threshold to pass budgets from 50% to 70% for all of those things like launch grants and teacher pay and fixing roads and all that stuff. I think if you ask the majority of the people, do you think we should need a 2/3 majority to pass all budgets in the state? They would say no. And I think, frankly, if you ask the majority of people in this building, they would say no. It's hard enough to keep the state decently funded and operating with a 50% threshold. You set that up at 67%, you are not going to see the needs of the people of Idaho met.
And tomorrow looks like it's going to be the first test of this new process to see if there will be an issue with reopening a budget with the required 2/3 threshold. JFAC has the governor's revised budget, the Office of Drug Policy, the Commission for Libraries, and the State Historical Society budgets on their agenda starting at 8 a.m. And tomorrow we will also try to get an answer as to how this process came to be the new norm.
am pleased to present Lafayette Carté's original hand-drawn map of public surveys to accompany his report to the Commission of the General Land Office in 1873.
Well, today, the Idaho State Historical Society presented the Idaho House of Representatives with that little piece of history. You can see it there. It's a drawn map by Idaho's first general surveyor. You can see that upper right corner, kind of not what it is today. Things have changed, obviously. Lafayette Carté. Carté was appointed to the position in 1866, and his job was to divvy up the territory so the federal government, well, so they could sell it. Job one, though, figuring out where to start. And as we laid it out in April of last year, in 1867, Idaho's initial point was set 19 miles south of Boise on top of a rocky butte. There are countless moments in history, points in time, where one can point from where everything evolved. For Idaho, that point is set in stone in the southwestern part of the state, known as the initial point.
So the initial point is the place on the map where the principal meridian and the baseline meet.
The principal meridian, the main line going north and south, and the baseline goes east and west. Terms that may not matter much to you, but they are critical to the public land survey system,
which is how all of the land in the American West was divided and cut up and then made available from 1785 through most of the 20th century.
Here's the Cliff Notes. The Land Ordinance of 1785 set this survey strategy in motion as a moneymaker for the federal government. Points were picked and the land was laid out in 160-acre plots as the United States spread westward. Nearly a century later, it was Idaho Territory's turn. So President Andrew Johnson appointed Lafayette Carté as Idaho's first general surveyor in 1866.
And the very first step in that process was establishing the initial point.
The instructions given by the General Land Office, it had to be a high spot or at the confluence of two streams. Carté went high and chose this volcanic bump 20 miles outside of Boise.
And it was established on April 19th, 1867.
That wasn't the only significance of this spot.
So the principal meridian had to radiate north to cover the entire panhandle, and the baseline had to radiate east and west to encompass the entire southern portion of the territory. Any survey that happened across the territory of Idaho would radiate out from that point on the landscape.
Seems simple enough until you realize how they did it.
They literally were working with chains and links, and they were literally out on the landscape walking with these chains.
Imagine walking a straight line, measuring around mountains and into canyons and across rivers, 66 feet at a time.
Wow. How long did that take?
Decades. There were sections of the state that were still being surveyed and resurveyed well into the late 20th century.
Whether it's on a map or in person, you can actually see how it all lays out from initial point.
Anyone lives on or is familiar with Meridian Road, that is the principal meridian in the state of Idaho.
Is that why it's called Meridian?
Correct.
Was it perfectly plotted? Not always. During a dedication of Initial Point for Idaho's territorial centennial celebration in 1963, organizers pointed out that wasn't on purpose.
Let's be tolerant of these old boys who did the pioneer work for us. I do not say that there are no fraudulent surveys, but generally, we find that the errors are honest mistakes made by honest men. Idaho is especially fortunate in this regard because few of her surveys were made by this method.
But she was made from this point, the importance of which should be anything but blunted.
Because without that moment in time, we wouldn't have homesteads, we wouldn't have had, the mining claims. That set in motion the development of the territory, which of course set in motion the economic development, the arrival of people of different cultures and ethnicities and experiences and backgrounds, which made this territory and then later the state what it is today.
Well, that viewing platform for Initial Point was first built in 1962, but has been vandalized significantly several times over the years. Like it's been spray painted, it's been shot up, straight up stolen. The one out there now, the brass plate, well, it's luckily been there since 2008. By the way, Idaho and Montana are the only two western states with their own initial points and the only initial points within that state. So we're pretty exclusive. And now the State House has a copy of the original map.
Let me share with you the 7-day forecast and what's anticipated. We have snow coming in tonight as well as tomorrow. Just a little more of a description on this. As you see tonight, we could be seeing a few inches into tomorrow morning. In fact, it starts this evening and then should stop around 5 o'clock tomorrow morning. We get another surge about 7 o'clock, so you have snow in your morning commute. Another surge about midday, could be anywhere from about 3 to 6 inches of snow. Late in the afternoon, as it starts to push some of this cold air out, notice the high tomorrow 36. We start to get some rain, but there could be some freezing rain in the transition. That could be later in the afternoon. So snow in the morning and possibly some pretty slick conditions if we do see the freezing rain later tomorrow. So keep up with the forecast, be careful. Thursday, later Wednesday and Thursday, we've got rain. I think this is a pretty heavy rain that's going to be coming in on Saturday. Temperature will be up to 41 degrees. And as you notice that these temperatures will be in the lower 40s or so, that's going to continue through Monday and Tuesday. We'll see storms off and on. It's going to be a stormy pattern coming up, but then mainly rain after we get through tomorrow.
A lot of you seem to be baffled that House State Affairs Committee Chairman Brent Crane does not read the bills before he brings them into committee. He doesn't read the bills beforehand. Isn't that part of his job? Please explain what his job is. That's according to a citizen and Idaho taxpayer wants to know how he makes decisions and comments on them. Crane admits not reading the bills. I'm shocked. How is he even doing his job? Jack in Boise, Crane doesn't usually read his bills because he's conceptual. What does that even mean? I guess he means he kind of wants to go in with a empty slate and kind of figure it out as it goes along. Just wondering if a committee cannot be kept to study medical trends, pregnancy fatalities. How are we ever going to keep track of non-existent issues at the library? library? It's a good question, Sue. Once again, Republicans are catering to an extreme minority of Idahoans, Floridians, on the library bill. They keep chasing windmills and destroying our liberties. As parents, my wife and I reviewed all books our kids read. No issues, says Chuck. Crane wants this issue of harmful library materials resolved, says Julie. It was last year with the governor's veto. What part of that does he not understand? Well, apparently, Representative Jaron Crane went to the governor and said, what do I need to do to make this not a vetoed bill? And he told him, and this is kind of what he has done, apparently. So we'll see if it goes forward in the House. See you tomorrow.